Go ahead.
My name is Gaby Haimowitz. My mother used to ask people to call me Gabriel because she didn't like the name Gaby. But I've been called Gaby all my life. I was born in Bulawayo in 1927, and I lived in a place called Marula, a little village south of Bulawayo, a couple of stations before Plumtree. Plumtree was on the border with Bechuanaland. I went to school, well, I started school in Marula. My first year there was in this little village. It was a farm school. Later I was sent as a boarder to Milton Junior. And after Milton Junior, where I was a boarder for 5 years, and after that I graduated to Milton Senior, but then we were living already in Bulawayo.
Gaby, where were your parents from?
My parents were from Romania. My father came to Rhodesia in 1911, where his father was already living. I didn't know my grandfather because he left back for Romania in about 1912. My father stayed in Rhodesia until 1925, when he decided to go back to Romania. Thank God he didn't. When he arrived in Romania, he already saw the Nazis active and persecuted, not actually persecuting, but there was anti-Semitism was quite rife. He got married to my mother, who was also living in Romania in a place called Vaslui. He told my mother that he sees what's going on and that he can't remain here and he's going back to Rhodesia. Because in Rhodesia he made a living, also in the African trading business.
That's what he did in Marula?
That's what he did in Marula. He had a shop on the station and ran a successful business in Marula. He had as his customers mainly African, but a lot of white farmers as well, Afrikaner farmers. And speaking of Afrikaners, he learned Afrikaans before English. So he was quite fluent in the language, and then he learned English little by little. When he went back to Romania to marry my mother, she came to Rhodesia in 1925, and she was already quite a linguist. She spoke French, German, Romanian, and she learned English. We lived in Marula for several years. While my father traded in this little shop. And he also at the same time became a cattle speculator. He used to buy and sell cattle. Especially he used to sell to the cold storage. And he was very close with the Greenspan brothers, who were also, they owned the New Netsi ranch in the eastern districts, or just in the center of Rhodesia. They had a very big ranch, and my late father used to deal with them. My father also was in the army in Rhodesia in 1915, in the First World War. This I didn't know anything about until I found a photograph on the internet of him sitting together with his fellow comrades in the photograph. After my school education, I became an apprentice telephonic engineer with the Rhodesian Postal Services for about a year. I stuck it for a year, but I found there was a little bit of anti-Semitism amongst the workers there, so I left and tried to get back to school. I wanted to do a bursary so that I could go to university, but the war was still on, the Second World War was still on, and there was conscription in Rhodesia at the time, as you know, and I was called up in the very last call-up in Rhodesia. And I served in the army for a year. I became a sergeant instructor.
You were based in Rhodesia?
Based in Rhodesia, yes. It was at the end of the war. The war ended in Europe as we finished training. So we had to we volunteered to go to the Eastern Front, which was against Japan. The war didn't last there much longer, so I was discharged soon after the war ended. I then took up an apprenticeship as a motor mechanic with a firm called S&S Cars, who were the agents for Studebaker and Standard, and I served a 4-year apprenticeship instead of 5-year. Because of my army service, I was given a year off and started receiving journeyman's pay after 4 years instead of 5 years.
Gaby, you were also very much involved, if I remember, with Habonim growing up.
Yes, I was very much involved with Habonim. From the age of 9 years, I went to my first Habonim camp in 1936 at a place called near Musenberg. What was the place called?
Lakeside.
Lakeside. I went to Lakeside Habonim camp. That's where I first met with Harry Shevitz, who was his first camp as a Rosh HaMachaneh. And after that, I went to several Habonim camps. My father saw to it that while I was at boarding school, saw to it that I joined Habonim, and he was a Zionist, and so was my mother.
Can you talk a bit about Habonim in those days?
Habonim in those days, well, I remember people like Sadie Kaplan, who was the very first Bakar. She was Bakar. She actually wanted to be Bakar forever. But until we learnt that in South Africa, they elected their officers. And then Mervyn Lasovsky became the first Bakar after Sadie Kaplan. And then when Mervyn retired, I became Bakar. And after my time, Buzz's brother, Zach, became, I gave over to Zach Menashe. My Habonim days were very, very happy. I think the movement in Bulawayo must have had about 200 to 250 Chanichim, and my brother also joined Habonim when he came to live in Bulawayo, and so did my sister, my late sister. After a year as Bakar, I decided time was ripe to go on Aliyah. So with great encouragement from both my parents, I came on Aliyah on my own and joined Moshav Habonim. where I spent 6 years, 6 happy years, and during which time I met my wife Freda, who was living on a neighboring moshav. And she joined me on the moshav, and she gave birth to our first son, Aliyah. And after a couple of years, we decided to come back to Rhodesia because my father wasn't well at the time, and I came back to assist him. So we both packed up, took our son, and we came back to Rhodesia, where we spent another 20 years, 20 difficult years, because things were changing in Rhodesia. We also could feel what was happening, and we always knew that we'd come back to Israel.
You were involved in CAZO.
I was involved in CAZO after a couple of years back in Rhodesia, trying to make a living. I worked with my late father, but I didn't like the business. He was in the furniture business, and I didn't like it at all. So I joined what was known then as the Rhodesian Zionist Council, where Rape Frank was the director and I became his assistant. When late Frank came on Aliyah, I was transferred to Salisbury, where I became the director of the office in Salisbury. I must say that my life in Salisbury was very, very good. The people there didn't treat us as strangers. We were accepted as part of the family. The Jewish community in Rhodesia as a whole was one big family. It was a great, great community. I made no distinction between Ashkenazim and Sephardim and Reform. In fact, I used to take turns in going to shul on a Friday night to each of the synagogues, because after all, they were all IUA contributors, and therefore I made no distinction. There were a few squabbles, but it was private. It wasn't general. I must say that I'm very proud that as the secretary of the Zionist Council and later CAZO, I managed to process, I think, about 500 to 600 olim from Rhodesia. And that made me very, very proud. I don't know if they're all still here. Some of them have left, but they at least tried. There are lots remaining in Israel. In fact, some of them are still here, and I've got friends, lifelong friends, who are in the movement as well. I tried working with the SA Zionist Federation for a while when I came back. I lasted about 9 months, and I soon left and went into private employment. And now I'm a volunteer with the SA Zionist Fed.
And you've been pleased that you made the decision to come back to Israel?
I'm very, very pleased, especially for Freda, whose family was still here. Her father and mother were still alive, and her brothers and sisters, and we were happy to be back. We always wanted to come back. We are lifelong Zionists. My father and mother were the same, and they always gave me encouragement.
Do you want to add anything else?
We had two kids here before us.
Oh yes, we
Aliyah was here.
before we went back, at least when we went back to Rhodesia, two more children were born, a son and a daughter, who are also in Israel as well. They came back. They came back before us, but they're still here, and they've managed to bring up families as well. And I have three grandsons with my son Ron, who lives in Gadara, who are champions in Taekwondo. In fact, my eldest, my second eldest grandson, Gilly, managed to get a silver medal recently. In fact, last week in Bosnia.
Fantastic.
And he was also junior Olympic champion in the last junior Olympics.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to add?
Not enough naches?
Ask me a few questions.
Well, the time's running, but when you think about the whole of your experience of growing up there, and you went back there, you know, you had those two experiences of different times of your life.
Yeah, I always consider Rhodesia as a paradise. Today, of course, it's hell. It's no longer a paradise, because we had a very, very good life there. Notwithstanding having servants, etc. But when we went back, we only had one servant, and she was part of the family. She even used to babysit our little dog.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Bye.
I forgot to mention that something very important, that both my mother and father came on Aliyah. My mother, both of them passed away here, and they are buried in Ramat Sharon.
What year was that? What year?
My father in 1963, I think. He passed away quite young. He was only 73 years old. My mother passed away about 12 years ago, and she was just short of 90 years of age. A little anecdote, that when I used to process people in Rhodesia, in the office of CAZO, youngsters used to come to me and try and speak about Aliyah, and I used to say to them, why do you want to go to Israel? Surely you can go to Australia, to the States, to South Africa. No, we want to go and die for Israel. I said, I don't want you to go and die for Israel. I want you to go and live for Israel. And they thought it was a big joke. Anyway, a lot of them came, fortunately, and a lot of them are still here. That's it.